Something is happening in Toronto right now that nobody saw coming. And if you own property in this city, are thinking about buying, or simply care about the direction of the Canadian economy, you need to pay very close attention to what I'm about to tell you. For years, Toronto was untouchable. It was the golden child of North American real estate, a market where prices only went up, where bidding wars were the norm, and where the idea of a home sitting unsold for months was almost laughable. But that reality has shattered, and it happened faster than almost anyone predicted. Unsold homes are now piling up across the Greater Toronto Area at a pace that has shocked analysts, rattled investors, and left homeowners questioning everything they thought they knew about this market. Before we dive deep into what is really going on, if you find this kind of content valuable, if you want to stay ahead of the curve on real estate, the economy, and the stories that actually affect your financial future, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Trust me, what we're covering today is just the beginning of a much bigger story. Let me take you back for a moment. Not too long ago, buying a home in Toronto felt like trying to grab a winning lottery ticket while blindfolded. Properties would hit the market on a Thursday and be sold by Sunday, often for hundreds of thousands of dollars over the asking price. People were submitting offers without even stepping foot inside a home. They were waiving inspections, waiving financing conditions, doing whatever it took to secure a piece of the Toronto dream. And for a while, it seemed like that dream would never end. Prices climbed year after year, sometimes by double-digit percentages. The average home price in Toronto crossed the $1 million mark and kept climbing, making homeowners feel wealthy and making potential buyers feel increasingly desperate. The psychology of the market was simple: buy now or be priced out forever. That mentality drove everything. But markets have a way of humbling even the most confident participants. And what we are witnessing right now in Toronto is a humbling of historic proportions. Let me give you some numbers that paint a very clear picture of what's happening. Active listings in the Greater Toronto Area have surged to levels not seen in years. We're talking about inventory that has more than doubled compared to the same period just a few years ago. Homes that would have sold in days are now sitting for weeks, sometimes months. The absorption rate, which is a measure of how quickly homes are selling relative to how many are available, has plummeted. When the absorption rate drops, it signals that supply is overwhelming demand, and that is exactly what's happening. In some neighborhoods, particularly in the condominium market, inventory has reached what can only be described as crisis levels. New construction condos that were pre-sold years ago are now coming to completion, and a significant percentage of buyers are walking away from their deposits. They're looking at the current market values, comparing them to what they agreed to pay 2 or 3 years ago, and realizing they would be underwater the moment they pick up the keys. So they're taking the loss on their deposits and abandoning the deals entirely. This is creating a flood of inventory as developers are forced to put these units back on the market at lower prices, competing against resale condos that are already struggling to find buyers. The rental market is telling a similar story. For years, Toronto landlords operated in what felt like a bulletproof environment. Rents climbed relentlessly, and finding tenants was never an issue. But that dynamic has shifted dramatically. Vacancy rates have increased, and landlords who purchased investment properties with the expectation of ever-rising rents are finding themselves in trouble. Some are listing their units at prices below what they need to cover their mortgage payments, property taxes, and condo fees. Others are holding out, hoping the market will recover. But every month that passes without a tenant is another month of carrying costs that eat into their financial reserves. So what caused this sudden reversal? The answer is multifaceted, but there are several key factors that all converged at roughly the same time. The most obvious is interest rates. When the Bank of Canada began its aggressive rate hiking cycle to combat inflation, mortgage rates climbed from historic lows of around 2% to levels exceeding 6% for some borrowers. This dramatically changed the math of home ownership. A buyer who could afford a $1 million home when rates were at 2% suddenly found themselves able to afford far less. The purchasing power of Canadian households contracted significantly, and many would-be buyers simply stepped out of the market entirely. They weren't just unable to buy, they were unwilling to take on what felt like crushing debt loads. But interest rates are only part of the story. The psychology of the market shifted in ways that are harder to quantify but equally important. For years, the fear of missing out drove buyer behavior. People rushed into the market because they believed prices would always go up. That belief has been fundamentally challenged. When prices started to plateau and then decline in certain segments, the urgency evaporated. Buyers realized they could wait. They could be patient. They could negotiate. And once that mentality takes hold, it feeds on itself. Why buy today when prices might be lower next month? That question, which was unthinkable just a few years ago, is now on the minds of countless potential buyers. There's also the issue of population dynamics. Canada has experienced unprecedented immigration levels in recent years, with the government setting ambitious targets to bring in hundreds of thousands of new permanent residents annually. For a while, this was seen as a pillar of housing demand. More people meant more demand for housing, which theoretically supported prices. But the reality has proven more complicated. Many newcomers arrive with limited financial resources and are not in a position to purchase homes, at least not immediately. They become renters, and even on the rental side, the sheer volume of new supply hitting the market has begun to outpace what even strong population growth can absorb. The investor pullback has been another crucial factor. During the boom years, a significant percentage of condo purchases in Toronto were made by investors, not end users. These investors were betting on continued price appreciation and strong rental demand. When both of those assumptions came into question, the investment thesis fell apart. Some investors are now rushing to sell, adding to the inventory glut. Others are holding properties that generate negative cash flow, hoping to ride out the storm, but their patience is being tested with every passing month. Let me tell you a story that illustrates what's happening at the ground level. Imagine a couple who bought a pre-construction condo back in 2021. They put down $100,000 as a deposit, believing that by the time the building was completed, their unit would be worth significantly more than what they paid. They planned to either sell it for a profit or rent it out at a rate that would comfortably cover their costs. Fast forward to today, and that condo has just finished construction. But the market has changed entirely. Comparable units in the same building are selling for less than what they agreed to pay. Their carrying costs, including mortgage payments at current rates, maintenance fees, and property taxes, add up to more than they could realistically charge in rent. They face a painful choice: close on the property and accept immediate negative cash flow and a potential loss in equity, or walk away from their $100,000 deposit. More and more buyers are choosing the latter, and every abandoned deal adds another unit to the pile of unsold inventory. The data from the Toronto Regional Real Estate Board tells a sobering story. Sales volumes have dropped significantly compared to historical averages, while new listings continue to climb. The months of inventory metric, which measures how long it would take to sell all available homes at the current pace of sales, has expanded well beyond what is considered a balanced market. We are now firmly in buyer's market territory in many segments, particularly for condos and in certain suburban areas where speculation was most rampant during the boom. What makes this situation particularly concerning is the speed at which sentiment has changed. Real estate markets typically move slowly. They're not like stock markets where prices can swing wildly from day to day. Housing corrections usually unfold over years, not months. But the confidence snap in Toronto has been remarkably swift. It's as if everyone simultaneously realized that the emperor had no clothes, and that realization triggered a cascade of behavior changes that are still playing out. Some analysts are drawing comparisons to previous corrections in Toronto's history, but there are important differences this time. The 1989 to 1996 correction saw prices fall by around 30% and took nearly 2 decades to fully recover in inflation-adjusted terms. But that correction occurred in a very different economic environment, with different demographics, different levels of household debt, and different global dynamics. Today's housing market is characterized by near-record levels of household debt, a significant proportion of which is tied to real estate. Canadians have more exposure to housing as a percentage of their net worth than almost any other developed nation. This means that a sustained downturn in housing prices could have ripple effects that extend far beyond the real estate sector. The banks are paying attention, and so are regulators. Stress tests implemented in recent years were designed to ensure borrowers could handle higher rates, but those tests were based on assumptions that are now being challenged. As more mortgages come up for renewal at significantly higher rates, the financial pressure on households will intensify. Some homeowners will find themselves unable to afford their new payments. Others will cut back drastically on other spending to keep their homes, which could contribute to a broader economic slowdown. There's a human cost to all of this that often gets lost in the statistics. Families who stretch to buy their first home are now watching their equity evaporate. Retirees who plan to downsize and use the proceeds to fund their golden years are finding their expected nest eggs have shrunk. Young people who finally scraped together a down payment and entered the market near the peak are questioning whether they made a catastrophic mistake. The emotional toll of these situations is real and significant. But let's also consider the other side of the equation. For people who were previously priced out of the market, this correction represents opportunity. First-time buyers who could only dream of owning a home in Toronto a few years ago might now find themselves with options. The power dynamic between buyers and sellers has shifted dramatically, and those with patience and financial readiness could potentially purchase homes at prices that would have seemed impossible during the frenzy. The question everyone wants answered is simple: where does this go from here? Unfortunately, there is no crystal ball, but there are scenarios worth considering. One possibility is that interest rates begin to decline as inflation comes under control, reviving buyer demand and stabilizing prices. The Bank of Canada has signaled that rate cuts could be on the horizon, and even modest reductions could improve affordability and buyer sentiment. However, it's worth noting that rates would need to fall significantly to restore the affordability conditions that existed during the boom, and most forecasters do not expect rates to return to those ultra-low levels anytime soon. Another scenario is a prolonged period of stagnation. Prices don't crash dramatically, but they don't recover either. The market enters a years-long period of sideways movement where neither buyers nor sellers are particularly happy. This kind of grinding stagnation can be psychologically challenging because it offers no clear resolution. Sellers wait for prices to recover while buyers wait for further declines, and the standoff continues. The more pessimistic scenario involves a deeper correction driven by forced selling. If economic conditions deteriorate, if unemployment rises, if mortgage renewals trigger widespread payment stress, we could see a wave of distressed sales that puts significant downward pressure on prices. This scenario is not the base case for most analysts, but it cannot be dismissed, especially given the elevated levels of household debt and the proportion of variable-rate mortgages in Canada. Government policy will also play a role in shaping outcomes. Measures to increase housing supply, support first-time buyers, or regulate the investment segment could all influence the trajectory of the market. There have been discussions about various interventions, but implementation is always uncertain, and the effects of policy changes take time to materialize. What seems clear is that the era of easy gains in Toronto real estate is over, at least for the foreseeable future. The mentality that housing only goes up has been challenged, and rebuilding that confidence will take time. The market is in a period of repricing, both literally in terms of home values and psychologically in terms of how participants view real estate as an investment. For current homeowners, the best advice may be to focus on the long term if possible. Real estate has historically been a reasonable long-term investment, but expecting the rapid appreciation of the boom years to return quickly would be a mistake. For those considering buying, the improved conditions offer opportunities, but careful analysis is essential. Understanding your true carrying costs, being realistic about future appreciation expectations, and ensuring you can handle potential further rate increases are all critical considerations. For investors, the game has fundamentally changed. The easy money that came from simply buying any condo and watching it appreciate while collecting rent is no longer a reliable strategy. Being an investor in this market now requires much more careful analysis, realistic cash flow projections, and a willingness to accept that returns may be modest at best. What we're witnessing in Toronto right now is more than just a market correction. It's a recalibration of expectations, a reality check after years of exuberance, and a reminder that markets move in cycles, even when it feels like they never will. The story is still being written, and there will be more developments in the months ahead. There will be winners and losers, opportunities and heartbreak. The key is to stay informed, make decisions based on facts rather than fear or greed, and remember that housing should ultimately be about having a place to live, not just a vehicle for speculation. If you found this breakdown valuable, please take a moment to hit the like button. It really helps the channel and lets me know you want more content like this. Drop a comment below with your thoughts on the Toronto market. Are you buying, selling, holding, or waiting on the sidelines? I read every comment and love hearing your perspectives. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the perfect time to join. We're going to continue following this story and many others that affect your financial future. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.